Hello and welcome back to Power Squared. We're your hosts, Charles and Josh. Today we're going to be breaking down the top level tenant settings in the Power Platform Admin Center, covering security, governance, and tips to keep your tenants safe and under control. So without further ado, let's jump in.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about in Power Platform governance, tenant level settings that you can find in the admin center to reduce the risk for your tenant, as well as to help manage things. So we're currently on the Power Platform Admin Center, which is admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com. And from here, we're going to look at the settings, and we're going to start with the most important and most pertinent settings. So Josh, what are we going to look at first?
Let's look at tenant isolation. I think that's a really important one to get started with because it's a very high level setting and it can have quite far reaching implications, right, if you turn this on. So what is tenant isolation? You can see there we've navigated into security, identity and access, and then you can see the tenant isolation setting there. Effectively, this is going to let us control data flowing in and out of our tenant, hence the name tenant isolation. We can set up exceptions, which you can see there. You can turn it on by ticking the restrict cross-tenant connections at the top, and then configure exceptions either inbound, outbound, or both, which you can see in the drop down there. And then put in the tenant domain ID, or if you want to block everything inbound and outbound, you can put asterisk. So, Charles, do you want to kind of explain a little bit more how that has an impact on a Power Platform tenant and what that means for makers and in terms of governance?
Yeah, sure. So it's in the name that it's tenant isolation. So you're blocking from tenant to tenant. So this is not on an environment level. This is on a very high level. This is your organization to organization level. And it's blocking specific connections. And those connections, it's not every single connection that you can create in Power Platform. It's only the ones where you authenticate with Entra ID. So it's your Microsoft Entra ID connections. And what will happen if you block those connections is that when someone tries to use a connector that uses Entra ID, they will get a message. So they're building a Power Automate flow. They try to use the connection. They'll get a message saying that it's blocked due to tenant isolation.
So what does that mean then if, let's say I want to use a OneDrive connector, I've got two tenants and I want to transfer, I'm a malicious actor and I want to transfer documents from tenant A to tenant B using my OneDrive account. Would this block that?
Yeah, that would block that. You would not be able to send from OneDrive on one tenant to OneDrive on the other tenant. So You're protecting your data.
So that's really good then from a security point of view, isn't it? Because it allows us to restrict that movement of data and protect makers and businesses from potential, data leakage, right?
It's massively important. And the fact that you can set it to just inbound or just outbound is really important as well, because you might be working with an organization where they are providing you with information, but you do not want to give them information. So you can set it to inbound and only receive the information from them, or vice versa.
Yeah. Okay, that's really good then. So I guess it's important to note that when setting this up is to be very kind of careful about how you're doing it and take precaution. From a tenant isolation perspective, when we're setting this up, we want to make sure that we're just being considerate around the implications of setting this up, because it may have, an impact if there's any existing connections that aren't malicious, right? So we just need to be kind of cautious when we're doing that.
Yeah, and if you have tenant isolation off and you do have cross-tenant connections, there is a report that you can find on Microsoft Learn that you can generate you can generate the reports. You can find the documentation on Microsoft Learn, and this report will tell you which connections you have that are existing. So then if you want to turn on tenant isolation, you can make sure you put those exceptions in as you go and turn it on so that you won't break anything that's already happening.
Awesome. So a really good feature at the tenant level to get to know and understand and consider using when looking at the governance and Power Platform. So moving on, if we now move into some of the other tenant level settings, if we go into manage and then under tenant settings here, we've got a whole bunch of settings that we can configure at a tenant level alongside what we've just looked at. So let's take a look at some of these. I guess the first one I would like to point out is developer environment assignments. Can you give a bit more kind of insight into what that is and why it's useful?
Yeah, so in our previous video, we talked about developer environments. So they're this place where you can build, learn, play around in Power Platform, and those developer environments are owned by a specific user. What you might not want is for your users to be able to just go ahead and create their own developer environments. We can have up to, how many is it now, Josh? 3 developer environments, or is it 5? I can't remember. 3. So you can imagine that someone could create 3 developer environments for themselves. Do you want them to do that? Possibly not. Maybe it's better to say only specific admins can create these developer environments. Therefore, you know what's going on in your tenancy and you can keep control of what's happening. You can manage it.
Yeah, so it's a really good feature and setting to be aware of, isn't it? I suspect if you wanted to have that control as an organization around provisioning environments, this is a good kind of way of doing it, isn't it? Because you could maybe route makers through a form or some sort of front-end interface to request an environment, and then only the admins can then go and create once they receive those requests, rather than it being like a floodgate situation where all of the potential makers are going creating 3 environments each, and then you've got environments sprawled all over the place, albeit with developer environments, right?
Yeah, and especially so if you have licenses. So if you've got premium licenses, you can use managed environments. You probably want those developer environments to go into an environment group so that you can restrict some of the settings. You don't want them to have ultimate freedom. You do want to still protect your organization.
Good stuff. So another really useful setting to keep in mind. So let's look at the next one. It's going to be our first managed environment specific setting of the video. But let's look at environment routing and what that is and the importance of that. So you can see there we've just navigated into environment routing, and there's a bunch of settings here. Do you want to kind of walk through what that is and how it can affect organizations / makers?
Yes. So when environment routing is turned on, it means that when someone goes to build something in Power Apps or Power Automate or Copilot Studio, they'll get routed through to their own developer environment. So it's basically their safe space to start building something in Power Platform.
Brilliant. So yeah, I guess it's important to know there that it's only going to route for Power Apps, Power Automate Desktop Flows and Copilot Studio, and you can see there as well. It's obviously going to be applied to specific security groups. So there's some considerations around how you can kind of work with that as well. But yeah, a really good setting. But yeah, obviously it's licensing dependent, isn't it? You need Power Apps premium licensing to set up environment routing, but it's a really good feature, something that I've seen organizations with licensing use with good success. It's a really good way of triaging how users actually go into an environment rather than just landing in, say, the default environment and creating lots of stuff there, isn't that?
Yeah, and as I said before about potentially not wanting developers to or makers to create their own developer environments, what you can do here is you can set up an environment group so that all of those new developer environments go into a specific group. So there's that additional protection through managed environments. Yeah.
So again, another really useful setting there. Obviously, sadly, only available for premium, but another reason to go down the premium route, isn't it? So something to keep in mind. when kind of weighing up that decision on licensing. If we move on to one of the next settings, I think it's worth calling out AI builder credits. You can see there on the settings, we've got one for AI builder credits. And it's a simple tick box, this one, isn't it? It's a fairly simple on and off kind of switch here. If this is enabled, we're going to allow users to consume unassigned AI builder credits. But if it's off, then they're not going to be able to consume it. So what's the impact of that, Charles? How does that impact an organization's decision on whether they should or should not have this enabled?
So the good thing with having it enabled, allowing those users to consume the credits, means that they can use whatever you've got left over for their AI builder creations, and they can bring some value to your organization through that. But the negative aspect to that is that what happens if they don't have those credits available in the future because they have been allocated elsewhere? Well, whatever they've built will suddenly run out of credits, and then you've potentially got a problem on your hands. So I'd say ideally you want to assign the credits to specific environments so that you know where they're supposed to be used. By leaving this turned on, potentially people will use credits and they won't have those credits available the next time. It could even be that one user consumes the credits that you've got available, and then another user comes along and they consume them before the other user. So you've got this potential race to use the credits in that situation as well. So there is some risk to do with leaving that allowed. My personal preference is not to allow users to consume unassigned credits, but rather to be very specific with how you want to utilize them.
Yeah, definitely. I would tend to agree with that sentiment, to be honest. You don't want the risk of letting these credits just get used up by makers. It's not like, if you use it, you can kind of revert that action. So, they're a once and done thing, effectively. Do take caution when thinking about whether this setting should be on or off. But I would say it's best practice to probably keep that off in this scenario, isn't it? So.
The other thing to bear in mind with AI Builder credits, if the viewers are not aware, is that they will reset every single month. So if you don't use something in that month, it doesn't matter, it's gone. You're not going to accumulate it. So every single month you're starting fresh.
Just resets. Yeah, that's good to know, especially if you're not kind of up to speed with AI Builder credits and how that works. So really good tidbit there. To know about. So let's look at another setting now, which is, I think, important when looking at the governance of this, and that's customer lockbox. Bit of a interesting one, isn't it, customer lockbox? Because it doesn't really, unlike some of these other ones we've spoken about, it doesn't really tell us kind of what it is, right out the gates like the other ones. So do you want to just kind of give a bit of a brief overview as to what customer lockbox is? How does it work?
Yeah, customer lockbox is something that you can turn on where you're locking your data from Microsoft being able to access it or a third party being able to access it. So this is where you've got particularly sensitive data, most likely, and you want to protect that data. And if Microsoft need to investigate something within your data, within your tenancy, then they would need to request access to that first. So you're in control of your data.
Well, that's really good. And I guess something I forgot to mention is it is another managed environment feature. So if you're dealing with really sensitive information within your Power Platform tenant, again, another compelling argument for the premium licensing, isn't it? Being able to kind of keep that information that you're kind of looking after very locked down, very governed and restricted, even from Microsoft themselves. So, yeah, really, really important setting to consider and think about. Next up, we have a really interesting setting that I think's caught a few people out fairly recently, and that was around flow run resubmission. So you can see it there in the menu, Power Automate Flow Run Resubmission. What we're doing here is basically saying whether we can resubmit previous flow flow runs, aren't we? So I think before we used to just be able to do that natively within Power Automate. If there was a failure or something, you could hit the resubmit button. But that kind of fairly recently got kind of taken away, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And there are potential pitfalls if you do allow it, because it might mean that that flow that was going to run has impacted on some data. And if you're resubmitting it, you're impacting on the data again. So it might be that you're duplicating data or you're creating data inconsistencies. I believe there might even be potential security impacts to do with resubmitting flow runs. So it is potentially a risky thing to allow people to use, which is why Microsoft have decided by default, we don't want people to be able to do this.
That makes sense. I think there's a lot of kind of ifs and buts in there, isn't there? If you do kind of have that on, and kind of some of the implications that can have around resubmitting Power Automate flow runs. So yeah, good one to know about. And up until recently, obviously you had to use PowerShell to re-enable this. So it's a good thing that we're now seeing this in the admin center, and we can control it from a from the nice interface that we've got here. So, okay. Next up, we'll kind of cover both of these at once. We've got trial and production environment assignments. We've already covered developer environment assignments. So how does trial and production environment assignments differ?
So they're the two different types of environments that we discussed in the first video or previous videos. So a trial environment, I actually don't think that we discussed this previously, did we? So trial environment is where you can trial Power Platform. What parts of Power Platform can you trial within that environment, Josh?
So I believe we get all of the premium features of Power Platform plus some dynamic stuff as well. Any viewers know specifically, please do let us know. But I'm fairly certain those are the two things we get as part of trial assignment, trial environments. And I believe it's for 30 days, isn't it, Charles?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so with these features, so we've got trial environment assignments and we've got production environment assignments. It's essentially who can create these environments. So if you leave it on everyone, then it means your users, as long as they have the right licensing, they can create these environments. And again, when Josh and I are looking at how we want to manage environments from a governance perspective, we don't really want users going off and creating their own environments. We want to have control over the environments, especially so with something like a production environment, because that's consuming capacity. We want to know what's consuming capacity. We want to have control over that. We potentially want our production environments to be in an environment group so that we can control the settings on that. There are lots of reasons why you would want to restrict these assignments to specific admins.
Yeah, completely agree. And I would argue that production and trial environment assignments is even more important than developer environment assignments in the sense of, like you mentioned, the consumption of capacity within your tenant. These should be things that are kind of very well governed and controlled from an organizational perspective. So really important to kind of think about how you're going to let these environment types be created and by whom, isn't it?
Definitely. So moving on to the weekly digest. So this is another managed environment setting. Josh, do you want to talk a bit about the weekly digest?
Yeah, sure. So as part of your managed environment kind of setup, you get access to a weekly digest, which is a weekly email summary. I believe it's for tenant admins, but it gives you a kind of analysis of what's going on at a tenant level and kind of just general kind of workings of what's going on. And what this is doing is just letting you specify additional recipients as to who will get that digest. So in addition to Power Platform admins and Dynamics admins, you can specify individuals who will get this digest as well. So you might have maybe some makers or someone at the kind of C-suite level that might want to, have these emails coming through, and then, this is where you go to add to that. So fairly straightforward setting. Anything you want to add to that, Charles? I don't know if I've done this one justice.
No, you have. So I suppose in addition to that, important factors are that you can't specify what information you want to happen to be sent in this email. So it's up to Microsoft at the moment, and it's always the same categories. The other side to it, I suppose, with the analytics that you get is that will depend on whether you've got tenant-level analytics turned on or not, as to whether you get more analysis, more analytical data. And that is another setting within here, I believe. Am I right in thinking that it's in here?
Yeah, you're right. There is analytics.
Analytics, that's the one.
Yeah. And again, it's just a toggle, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And the reason why you might want to disable this is if you've got a multi-region setup. So maybe you are based in another country than the UK, and you don't want your data from the UK to go outside of the country. You might want to disable this because it will send data outside of the UK in that situation. As far as that data is concerned, there's not much that's necessarily sensitive, but the names of apps and flows could potentially be regarded as sensitive. It will depend on your setup. But yeah, depending on your local laws, rules, regulations, you might not want data traveling cross-region. So the last thing that I want us to talk about before we sign off is to do with preview features, because the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that some of the things on here have brackets preview next to them, such as Copilot in Power Apps and Copilot Studio Authors. So one of the things that's really important to note about preview features is that there's a disclaimer from Microsoft that the data from preview features can be sent outside of your region. And that's often the reason why they're in preview, because Microsoft don't have the servers, they don't have the resources available to store the data across all of the regions. So for Copilot and Power Apps, you might want to turn that off if you're not happy with the natural language data that your users, your makers are sending through to Microsoft, because it might, for instance, for us being in the UK, that data might go to the USA, and we might have potential issues with data residency because of that. The other thing I wanted to point out with specifically Copilots in Power Apps is that there's Plan Designer in Power Apps. For those who don't know, Plan Designer is Microsoft's new sort of engine for turning a business process from natural language into a suite of Power Platform tools that can perform that business process. So it might create multiple Power Apps, multiple Power Automate flows. But the other aspect to it is that it also might suggest Power Pages. And you might not want people to be building Power Pages if they're not IT developers. The other side is Copilot Studio Agents. If your organization isn't set up for Copilot Studio Agents, you might not want your makers to create them. You might not want them to be suggested by Plan Designer. So if you turn this feature off, Plan Designer won't be used. If it's on, Plan Designer can be used.
It's a really good point, isn't it? And really good point on the preview features and how that can affect data residency. It's definitely an important aspect when, particularly in larger organizations, when there's a lot of sensitivity around where your data kind of resides. So something to take into consideration. We've kind of picked out probably some of the core things that we believe you should be thinking about when looking at a tenant, some of the settings to kind of govern your tenant in a better kind of way, and some considerations to take there. So in our next video, we're going to be talking about a bit more on the environment level, aren't we? Do you want to kind of give a little bit of a teaser as to what to expect then, Charles?
Yeah, we'll go through environment creation and what you need to be aware of when you're creating environments, because it's not as simple as just providing the name and job is done. There's quite a bit to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there, so do tune in for that one, and we look forward to welcoming you back. So this has been another episode of Power Squared, and we look forward to seeing you soon.